There was a time when a ball game was an afternoon's appointment with nerve and craft, when a single run felt like a poem written in spikes, and when the hero in gray flannel didn't wait for the game to come to him. He took it. In that time, the name that stirred crowds and unsettled infields was Tyrus Raymond Cobb. He was not the soft-focus nostalgia of lace curtain memories. He was the raw pulse of early baseball, precision at the plate, menace on the bases, calculation in the gaps, unapologetically competitive and relentlessly excellent. If remembering the real heroes means remembering what the game demanded of body and mind, then it means saying his name out loud and telling the truth about what he did between the lines. Cobb was born in 1886 in rural Georgia and reached the American League as a teenager, carrying with him a temperament sharpened by hardship and a will fixed on mastery. He arrived with the Detroit Tigers in 1905, a narrow-hipped outfielder with a quick bat and a flickering baseline of speed that would soon become legend. By 1907, he had already transformed the Tigers' attack from pleasant to predatory. He didn't just hit, he orchestrated innings. He treated 90 feet as negotiable, a question to be argued with nerve and advantage. He could drop a bunt with surgical touch, then turn an infield into a chessboard, stealing second, reading a lazy return, taking third, then daring pitcher and catcher into mistakes that put him at home standing up. What makes Cobb's career read like a dare to history is the simple relentlessness of it. He batted at least .300 in 23 consecutive seasons, every year after his rookie campaign, across a league that routinely suppressed offense, across ballparks that played like vast fields of order and retribution, across deadened baseballs and unforgiving travel. He won 12 batting titles, including 9 in a row at his peak, the longest such streak the sport has ever known. He hit over 403 separate times, with a high-water mark of 420 in 1911, and he fashioned a lifetime batting average of 366, the best ever recorded in Major League history across the era in which he played. The math of that achievement, the thousands of at-bats, the task of daily excellence, beggars belief. It was not an accident of softness or era, it was intention, repetition, and an edge honed to a bright wire. The numbers that define Cobb can feel like a ledger from another game. 4,189 career hits by the common historical count, a plateau reached long before the sport reimagined conditioning and extended careers, long before video, charter flights, and tailored workloads. 2,246 runs scored, a lifetime's worth of crossing the plate that remained the summit for generations. 897 stolen bases, back when the theft of a bag felt like open rebellion, including a record 54 times stealing home, the most audacious act a runner can attempt. He collected 14 five-hit games and once completed the ultimate theft, second, third, and home in succession, in a single inning, not as a stunt, but as a tactic. He won a Triple Crown in 1909 with a .377 average, 9 home runs, and 107 RBIs in an age when driving the ball into the alley was more practical than clearing fences that often stood like distant hedgerows. He did not swing to impress. He swung to win. Cobb's bat path was short and to the point, his hands quick, his placement ruthless. He exploited pitcher tells, infield alignments, the slowness of a catcher's transfer, the tempo of a right-hander's leg kick. He studied the dirt, the moisture on the grass, the lean of a third baseman shading the bunt, the way a fielder's eyes gave away a first step. He was a student of slivers and angles, and he weaponized them until the game tilted. In an era of muted offense, he led the league in hits 8 times, runs 5 times, RBIs 4 times, and triples 4 times or more, depending on the source. His slugging was not the cartoon of upper deck blasts. It was the accumulated shock of doubles rifled into alleys, triples hooked toward deep corners, liners passed drawn-in infields who had already seen enough bunts to be honest. Cobb's Tigers won 3 consecutive American League pennants from 1907 to 1909, and though a World Series crown never landed in Detroit during his tenure, it would be historically illiterate to mistake the Tigers' autumn losses for the failure of their leader's approach. October, then, was a reduced sample proposition played on fields and under rules that punished an offense-first star. What remains is the footprint of a player who dragged a franchise upward and stamped his identity on its style for a generation. And when his Detroit years closed, he still had more to say. He finished his career with the Philadelphia Athletics in 1927 and 1928, hitting .357 and .323 in those final acts. Proof that craft can turn back time for a while when legs no longer can. The legend of Cobb is not only what he tallied, but how he fought for it. He possessed an appetite for confrontation, a kind of moral gravity that pulled a contest into his orbit. That edge, so admired in modern retrospectives when framed as competitive fire, fed a reputation that has been both varnished and vandalized in the decades since he retired. There is no use pretending he was gentle in a sport that rewarded roughness. He wasn't. He quarreled. He intimidated. He burned. Later caricatures, drawn by sensationalized accounts, tried to make him a symbol for every cruelty of his century. Reality is more complex. What can be checked in the record is that he spoke in favor of black players joining the major leagues long before it became consensus, that he endowed scholarship funds in his home state, that he invested wisely and gave widely without needing trumpet or headline. None of that erases the sharpness of his temper on certain days. It simply returns him to the human scale. A brilliant, driven ball player whose flaws were visible because he lived under a magnifying glass for 24 summers. To call his era pure is not to wash it in sepia and hymns. It is to recall the material conditions that tested a player daily, train travel that shook bones, fields that played truer to weather than to groundskeeping, rations of sleep that would be condemned by any modern performance staff, balls that softened by the 7th inning and demanded a different swing. It is to remember the crowds who came to see tactics as well as thunder, the black art of the hit and run, the squeeze executed like a magician's reveal, the delayed steel that cracked the tension of a 1-1 9th inning. Within that canvas, Cobb was the most effective painter, the richest palette, the finest brush control, and the most ruthless composition. What lingers when the game quiets and the arithmetic settles is not a softened portrait. It is the respect due to the most accomplished hitter of the early modern game, the one who made a career out of doing the hardest thing in sports as often as anyone ever has. He retired with more than 90 major records attributed to his name, and with a voting share in the inaugural Hall of Fame class that topped even the giants who stood beside him. He was elected on the first ballot with the highest vote total in 1936, a verdict from those who had seen him up close and knew exactly what he had done to their teams and for his. There are, even now, pieces of his legacy that refuse to fade, the lifetime average that still sits at the summit. The stolen bases that remind us speed has its own kind of authority. The hits total, once the Everest of the sport, that kept its crown until the late 20th century. The streaks of .300 seasons that stretch across the page like a horizon. And the image that comes to mind whenever his name is said among those who learned baseball before it learned them. A figure in a gray Detroit uniform, spikes biting dirt, cap tugged low, eyes hard, bat loose but ready, watching a pitcher who suddenly looks unsettled because he knows the argument for 90 feet is about to begin again. When baseball was called pure, what was meant, if we're honest, was not innocence, but instruction. The game taught hard lessons with a firm hand, Adapt or be outguessed, hustle or be replaced, study or be fooled. Ty Cobb was its sternest teacher and its most committed pupil. Remembering the real heroes means remembering that the game's greatness has always been built by difficult men doing difficult things in difficult times. Cobb did more of those things more often than almost anyone who ever lived. Strip away the myth, the hagiography, the axe grinding, and what remains is the record, the film in the mind's eye, and the truth that excellence at that scale is never accidental. So remember him properly, not as a saint, not as a villain in a ready-made morality play, but as the fiercest competitor of a fierce age, the master of a craft that rewards nerve and punishes distraction. If the old game asked for a heartbeat that never blinked, he supplied it. If it demanded a hit where there wasn't one to be found, he manufactured it. And if it required a runner to make 90 feet feel like a mile for the men trying to stop him, he did that too, as many times as he needed to, for as long as it took to be remembered.